Well, I leave for a little birthday weekend getaway to Boston, and you guys think I'm not going to come talk to you about UConn to the Big 12? Of course, I'm going to come talk to you about UConn to the Big 12. Not only did you get the video earlier, we're going to break it down in more detail here because I've been very interested to see what the reaction was and what some of the pushback was to those who are not as into the idea of UConn in the Big 12, which is very interesting to me because especially the way that this story is laid out and the way that it seems like everything is evolving around all of this, it appears to be a pretty damn good deal for the league. We're talking about the Big 12 getting in on UConn basketball for now, for the next however long, 5-6 years at least, before UConn football is going to enter. If you're talking about getting UConn hoops in 2026 and UConn football, you don't have to worry about that until 2031. Man, who knows what 2031 is going to look like when it comes to college athletics. And in the meantime, you get to leverage your basketball brand with UConn, the back-to-back national champs, the team that just smoked their way through the entire NCAA tournament field 2 years in a row to win back-to-back, and their head coach just decided to say no to the LA Lakers and instead opt to stay at UConn, meaning like who else is going to come court that guy and actually take him away if he's saying no to the Lakers? I don't know, man. I like a lot of what is happening here with UConn potentially. And it seems like there is some internal pushback within the Big 12. So like I do understand that not everybody is on board with this, but I am enjoying the idea of it a lot, very much coming around to it under these parameters and under these circumstances. But with that, I will ask all of you guys, if you are not with it, let me know about it. Definitely give me a little bit of pushback on it and tell me why it is that you're not so down with the Huskies coming to the Big 12. I want to know why. I looked through some of the main reasons, and one of them has to do with the title of this video, which is why the video is actually titled, hey, Florida State, Clemson, and UConn are all in play for the Big 12. I'm not saying that any of the three is necessarily more likely than not, at least as of right now. I tend to think UConn may be, but that's not based on any info. That's just reading the tea leaves here and how hard Yormark is really pushing this. And to me, what the terms of the deal actually seem like. I don't think Florida State and Clemson are anywhere close to being more likely than not, but they are all still in play. I don't understand this idea that people seem to have of like, if you go get UConn now, like why not just wait on the ACC? It's a bad move to do it now when you still have to wait on the ACC. Why does it matter? I see a lot of the pushback is you don't need to do it now because UConn will always be there. Well, so will the ACC schools. And by the way, at some point, the ACC is going to probably need to backfill here because they are going to lose Florida State, Clemson, and North Carolina at the very least. So I would just push back with the same kind of message on that. But I want to dive deeper into it, and I will here on the show today. So that will certainly be a piece of what we go after today. I have a comparison for all of this. I think this is very, very similar to like the private equity risk that the Big 12 is mulling over taking on right now, where it's a great benefit in the short term. Yes, there is some risk on the back end, but I think this is even a lesser version of it here with UConn. So I can give you that on the show today. We have some actual football to talk about. And I know for Big 12 fans, it was really entertaining to not just watch Florida State lose, which I don't think Big 12 fans, at least I can speak for myself, I didn't really care that much. It's not like I'm rooting against Florida State for some sort of realignment Twitter clout or spite or anything like that. But SMU, now that's a little bit different of a story. And that's even me being a guy who's based in the Midwest, not in the state of Texas. You know, if you're a Baylor fan, if you're a Texas Tech fan, certainly if you're a TCU fan, you've had about enough of SMU fans running their mouths and realignment and Big 12 Twitter over this entire offseason. So it was very, very funny to see them being put in a pretzel there for a while by Nevada. Unfortunately, that one did not work out. But there is kind of a message here, which is like, you know, be careful what you wish for, at least on the interwebs, as you go into a week 0 spotlight sort of a game for both of those teams. Anyway, we have that to talk about. We've got Colorado and Coach Prime. We'll see how much you guys really care about it. I mean, I think it's a fascinating issue that's going on between he and Sean Keeler of the Denver Post right now. If you missed it, Sean Keeler of the Denver Post is not allowed to ask Coach Prime any more questions the rest of the year. Dion has shut that down. So that's an interesting battle to pick and go that deep on. I think if it is me talking about what Coach Prime is choosing to do here and perhaps focusing on the wrong sorts of things as we head into the season. But we'll break all that down. I find this part particularly interesting, not just because of the figures involved, not just because it is Coach Prime and he draws so much attention, but also just because I've sat in these rooms. I did it for a decade. I know what the dynamics can be between a coach and the media. And to me, that gives me not only, I think, just a lot of insight, but also it's something I'm interested in because I lived and breathed it every single day for 10 years. So, but, judging by the Colorado, it just doesn't seem like you guys go for the Colorado videos at all. As much attention as there is on Coach Prime, it seems like everybody's a little fatigued by that, probably a little fatigued by the Coach Prime thing. But anyway, so that's all there. We can talk some Big Ten quarterbacks if you want, because I saw a list of Pro Football Focus's best quarterbacks in the Big Ten. And man, it's pretty funny. And by funny, I mean, how is quarterback play so bad in the Big Ten? I think Drew Aller, who was the second highest rated quarterback in the Big Ten, would be about the 7th or 8th best quarterback in the Big 12, at least going into the year on paper right now. So if you want me to take some shots at the Big Ten, we can certainly get into that as well. But that's what I have for you. You guys know, if you've been here before, though, you can be a big part of the show as well. Keep the questions and comments coming. Appreciate all you guys there. Appreciate everybody that is chiming in from Twitter. We've got, a little over 300 already on Twitter. If you guys want to be a part of this and get your questions or comments in, you can join on YouTube. Just look up John Kurtz on YouTube and you can join in there. And of course, those of you that are in the YouTube chat, you know that if you want to be a part of the show and make sure that your question or comment gets on, you can click the $ below the chat box to submit a donation. It'll make it a super chat, which means it will get read on the show tonight. So that's the way that you can guarantee to be a part of the show here. I see Michael says very fatigued. All right. So people are very, very fatigued. Ryan seems to be fatigued by UConn. I will jump off of this into a question that I got, or a comment that I got from Mark, who gave a very generous donation along with that. But Ryan, it is absolutely not a non-story. It's been reported by ESPN, Yahoo Sports, the Action Network. I mean, it's McMurphy, Thamel, Dellinger. It's like the holy trinity of college football reporters, plus Andrew Marchand from The Athletic. I'm sorry, my man. You may not like UConn to the Big 12. It may not be a story you want, but it's absolutely a story. And I do have to take a moment to give credit to Locked On Big 12 and Locked On UConn. I know they did. Was it a video that was on Drake's channel, or was it the Locked On UConn channel? Either way, they did plant that seed early. And I got asked about it, I think by Mark, who I'm about to refer to in just a moment. I got asked about it and said, look, I had heard something of the sort a little while back, but it didn't sound like anything was imminent, just that UConn was still very much in play. Sounded like it was just something your Mark wasn't giving up on, which was not really surprising to me. But those guys nailed the urgency of it, and we're ahead of the curve with this coming out then with every single major college reporter out there. So I had somebody ask me about that on Twitter. They do deserve credit for that. They definitely do deserve credit for that. So credit where it's due on that front. So let's go to Mark. Mark, I appreciate you. Mark chimes in on Venmo here. And if you guys want to be on the show, you're not watching it live, Venmo is a great way to do that. John-Kurtz-4. You can donate there. And if you submit a question or comment, it will lead off the next show. And that's why we are here. I appreciate you, Mark. Mark says, even though college football is starting, I would love to hear more about Big 12 basketball, with UConn possibly joining, and the rise of BYU basketball with Kevin Young. Well, Mark, BYU fan, obviously, I appreciate you. First of all, thank you. Well, there are a lot of good things happening with BYU basketball. I've said it before on this channel. I really, truly think that BYU may have upgraded, even though their coach just left for Kentucky, which seems a little bit crazy. But I think Kevin Young was a hell of a pull. Obviously, a guy that was making a lot of waves in the NBA. And when you combine that with seemingly a lot of NIL resources behind BYU, that poll that just came out this week, I think that was earlier this week, that, who was it? Was it Goodman and company? Forget if it was Goodman and those guys. One of the major college basketball reporters dropped hey, we asked all the college basketball coaches in the country who has the most NIL money based on your perception. And BYU was in the top 3, right next to Kansas. So BYU's got some money. They're currently right now considered to be the favorite for the number 1 recruit in the 2025 class. So yeah, Mark, I mean, I'm very aware of the rise of BYU basketball. That obviously is coming on the heels of the great season that they had last year, winning at Allen Fieldhouse, not taking a step back to hardly anybody in the league and coming in last year. I think BYU has a lot to be excited about with hoops. And I know, I will say, Mark dropped this question onto Venmo before I think I had even released the video that came out yesterday about UConn and the Big 12. But it is just a great jumping off point to my main take for you here and my main point on all of this, because you heard, if you watched the video, which I would encourage all of you to do if you want to just get a feel for where I am at on UConn and the Big 12, you got not only all the details of what is being reported by all these different entities, which you kind of have to pull in different bits and pieces here, and you get a wide range of, hey, the Big 12 is going to be meeting next week, which that is happening. Big 12 met with UConn last week. Your Mark is going to meet with the board this week to try and push the UConn story. Like, that much is definitely happening. But like how serious the talks are, and basically like how close your Mark is to actually convincing everybody to go for it in the Big 12, that's what's currently up for dispute. If you read the Pete Thamel ESPN article, it's a little bit more like, hey, this is going to be pretty far down the road. It's maybe more of a long shot. You can read other pieces like, Brett McMurphy's maybe had a little bit more of a tone like, this could happen. I feel like a lot of those other stories were not quite as reserved on it as Pete Thamel was. But either way, I view it like this. The parameters that are laid out here seem pretty good for the Big 12. And it makes sense because UConn, their general sentiment seems to be here like we don't have a ton of leverage because we need a home. Like, we need somewhere. It's either get on the boat now and give our football program a chance, or basically be a basketball only school. Like, that feels like the inflection point that UConn realizes that they are at. I saw a take from one of their mega donors who said exactly that. Like, we would like to stay in the Big East. I understand, fans. Like, I would like to stay in the Big East. But if we're going to get football ever up to where we want it to be, or just a survivable football program here in this era now of revenue sharing, we've got to join a conference, and we've got to have the financial backing that joining the Big 12 would give us. That's a necessity. And so UConn realizes that. So you actually have quite a bit of leverage over them. Now, I know some Big 12 fans would come back at me and say, well, John, the ultimate thing here would be like, we want UConn for basketball, and that is it. Just basketball. Don't let them bring their football, other sports, whatever. But we want the basketball. Well, okay. Yes, the one bargaining chip UConn has is that, yes, in order to do this, we do need something out there for our football program. So Brett Yormark's counter seems to have been here. All right, we'll give you until 2031. We'll give you until the next TV contract comes up, when we're going to split these two things. Get your football ready by then. Guys, it is 2024, man. That's 7 years. That's a 7-year windup that they will have to get their football ready. I'm not saying that that's easy, but what I would also say is, what do we think could happen to the college athletics landscape in 7 years? 7 years ago was 2017. None of this was even close. We weren't even talking about NIL in 2017. So think about all that has changed from now to then, and all that could change from now to then. It is insane. And we don't really know what the landscape is actually going to look like. So leverage their basketball, which is easily right now the best thing going in the country, winning back-to-back titles and winning them in as dominant a fashion as they have, and keeping their coach away from the Lakers. Guys, use that now. use that now to build the basketball brand, gear up for the split, and just see what happens. Like, see what is actually going to happen down the road. UConn football may not wind up being great. There is some risk there that if you sign on the dotted line that, like, hey, we will take the football program at that point. I'm not sure exactly how it will wind up looking, but if you're signing on the dotted line, hey, we will take the football program at that point, then yes, there is some inherent risk there. We'll see what that language would actually look like. I'd be interested what that does look like if there are complete guarantees for UConn that their football would get in at that point. But even if so, that is a risk on the back end, but things may be completely different by then, and it may not really matter. You know what I mean? What's the ACC stuff will be resolved, I feel very confident in saying, by 2031. And that brings me to, like, one of the biggest pushback items I've seen on this is a lot of people telling me, well, John, wait until the ACC thing happens. When ACC schools are potentially out there, why would we be sitting around worried about UConn right now? And my answer would be, why does UConn stop you from doing anything in the ACC, especially if, again, you're not diluting anything monetarily? The reports are right now that Brett Yormark is saying, guys, this will not hurt us money-wise right now. This will come at no cost to the Big 12 in the immediacy if we were to add UConn basketball and Olympic sports in 2026. No cost in the immediacy. So why would that affect a single thing with anybody coming from the ACC? Let's break it down. And again, this is why I used the title that I did for the video. Everything is still totally on the table here if you add UConn. Florida State and Clemson are only coming to the Big 12 if it is a last ditch, like, this is the only option that we have. None of us that are, I guess, at least honest with ourselves in the Big 12, all of us have to admit that. If we're being, let me put it that way, we have to admit that if we're being honest with ourselves in the Big 12. It's a last ditch effort. We understand, man. If Florida State and Clemson are coming to the Big 12, it's because they struck out with everybody else, and it's closing time playing on the jukebox at the bar, and they're looking down at the end of the bar with some beer goggles and saying, Big 12, let's go. That's what it is. We all know that. The fact that UConn might be in the league is not changing any of that. I don't really understand why that seems to be a thought process from somebody. And I would actually spin it around and say, what about the ACC trying to backfill here? Now, if I'm UConn, I would be looking at this very, very much like, okay, the ACC is not a very stable, safe place. If they lose Florida State, Clemson, North Carolina, that's going to be a conference that's more toothless than the Big 12. Why do I really want to go there? But they might say, geographically, that makes a little bit more sense. We can get back in bed with, like a Syracuse. That'd be a cool rivalry. I mean, there's a chance they would do that if UConn wants to, if the ACC wants to backfill, and they could start looking at that. So this is a preemptive strike to prevent that from happening. That's the way I would view it. And I think it makes a lot of sense, the timing on this, why Brett Yormark would be pushing it now, saying like, hey guys, like, we're probably going to have to do this now or never on UConn. And by the way, they just won 2 national championships. Strike while the iron's hot. I think there's a lot that is flowing towards that and pushing things towards that being what's happening there. So I know a lot of you guys have chimed in with super chats. I'm going to get to those in just a moment. And I know this is typically not the way I would do this, but I did get some pushback on this, which is what I was looking for. So I want to bring this up real quick from AMAC. AMAC says, because John, taking UConn eliminates a spot for one of the ACC football teams if they become available, but that's a big if, hence the dilemma. Why are there a finite amount of spots? I guess that would be my question. Why are there a finite amount of spots? UConn football is not coming until 2031. You don't know at all what the landscape will look like in 2031. Why is the assumption that there's like a finite amount of spots available and you would be not taking who? Pitt? Like, Pitt gets kept out because of UConn football? I mean, first of all, I would say, is that really that big of a difference and that big of an issue if that were the case anyway? And second of all, I don't think there are really a finite amount of spots. I think you're operating from much more a position of power than all this. I appreciate the opinion here, AMAC, and I appreciate you being in here, but I don't view it like that. I don't. Let's check in with Lewis here real quick. Lewis, thank you for joining the show, and thank you for your support of the channel. Lewis says, I think Yormark knows what is best for the league that continues to exist because of him. The old 8 need to realize it. Go Cougars, all of them. All right, well, first of all, shout out to all the Cougars. Thank you for that, Houston, BYU. And yeah, there's definitely a level of trust that I have in Brett Yormark, which is a part of this. And I know not everybody has as much, even though he's clearly kept the league alive when I don't think it would be without him. I get it. Some people are going to be more skeptical and not just you can call it blind from me. I don't think it's blind. I think it's based on results that we've seen him produce. But I do probably have a higher level of faith in Brett Yormark than some, but I'm glad to see that you are with me, Lewis. You know, there are things here we could debate some of the merits of if you're talking about what UConn does. If you want to debate a piece of it that Yormark really likes, which is just that you are nabbing basically the biggest brand of anything college sports related in the Northeast and getting a foothold in a pretty populous state. I mean, 3.2 million people in the state of Connecticut. A lot of them are going to care quite a bit about UConn, and that'll bleed over into all different portions of the Northeast. They're also based in Connecticut. You know what else is based in Connecticut? ESPN is based in Connecticut. You know, we can debate how much all that stuff really matters. The brand thing, or markets anyway, markets like being in the Northeast and market size. And can you flirt with some, New York? The market size doesn't really matter that much anymore, but brand is what matters now. Like brand value really matters. So taking the brand of UConn basketball that so many people care about up there, yeah, I do think there's a lot of advantage to that. What you can't deny is that, you do this, you're immediately the SEC of basketball. UConn, Kansas, Arizona, Baylor, Houston, you got the last 4 national champions of the sport. Well, the last 3 national champions over the last 4 years because of UConn's back-to-back. You've got them all in your league. That has some real value to it. I know football is always the driver in realignment, and I'm the one that would just shove that message down your throat all the time. Unless if you've got this overwhelming behemoth of basketball, that is going to have some actual tangible, legitimate value. And this is one, as I said in the video the other day, this is one that Sankey can't replicate. He can steal your idea on basketball decoupling and not allow you to take just all that, say, whatever it's going to be, $5-6 million extra a year per school. Maybe the SEC can do it and they can make back 3 or 4 of that, right? They can get some of it back. You're not going to take it all as profit or making up the margin on them. But this is something that he won't be able to replace. You'll at least make up some ground. Even if this idea gets stolen too, you'll at least make up some ground if you have UConn there. That's the case. That's the case from me for this. And it seems like Lewis obviously is on board with that. Julius, appreciate you, Julius. Thank you for being here. Very generous as always, my friend. Great to hear from you. Julius says, howdy, John. Thanks for getting us through the offseason. Oh, yeah, we are, my friends, through the offseason. We saw college football on our TV screens on Saturday. I just want to show some support and wish best of luck to all the Big 12 fans on the upcoming season. Julius, we appreciate it. Everybody, please give a nice round of applause. Some kudos to Julius for not only supporting the channel, but just always being very kind to everybody in the league. You're not going to get Julius in here talking smack on your team. All right. Julius is supporting everybody, and we really appreciate that. So thank you, Julius. Appreciate you being here as always, and look forward to seeing you throughout the season as we get started. David, what's up, David? David says, Big 12 can't wait for the ACC to land UConn basketball. ACC might not fall apart like the Pac-12. Bingo. That is a clear part of this, David. And I would have to imagine it's a part of the urgency from Brett Yormark here being like, yeah, guys, there are some logical ties to the ACC for UConn in terms of the membership of the league. It is also a strong enough basketball league. I guess we say right now, they're going to lose North Carolina. The ACC is going to lose North Carolina. If it still is a league with Duke, Louisville, Syracuse, there's still some punch to it, and that would still allow them to make more money in football, obviously, than they are right now, and give their football program more of a chance. I would still make the case that if I were UConn at that point and I were really evaluating the two options, I'd still think the Big 12 is a better option. It's going to be a better basketball league at that point. I would also say it's going to be a better football league. But it is at least still something out there. And the fans would probably be, with the regionality of it, more happy with that. From having some old rivals back, would be more happy with that. It's something that there is a time element to this. I agree, David, and that was a part of the point I was making earlier. I think there is a time element to this based on the ACC situation right now. And to me, I fail to see a lot of the risk in terms of like taking up a spot or whatever it's going to be I don't think it will prevent you from doing anything as it relates to the ACC and a potential implosion of the conference. So I think it's a good point. I think it is a good point, David. Appreciate that. Nate, what's up, Nate? Thank you for being here, Nate, and thank you for your support. Nate says, I can see adding UConn as a preemptive move if the Big 12 has success in separating basketball and football media rights, and the SEC copies that idea and tries to take Kansas for basketball. Nate, you must have been watching the video I posted yesterday. Because that sounds really smart, and I agree with it, and I said the same thing. Not only are you taking a bit of a preemptive strike and saying, all right, Sankey, if you're going to steal this idea and you're going to decouple your basketball rights and you'll make some extra money off that, we'll still make more than you are, which will gain us at least a little bit of ground. But the other thing is, when we talked about Kansas and when Greg Flugar, who again is very plugged in, mentioned that Kansas to the SEC at least is within the realm of possibility. It may not be likely, but it's at least something that could be on the table. And a big part of the reason why is because Sankey has this idea, man, I could swipe what they did and I could go all in with my basketball. I'll take Kansas. The Big 12 would say, okay, that sucks. Not great to lose them there, but at least now we've backfilled with UConn basketball. That's not bad. That's not bad that you're swapping them out. I know, look, Kansas fans, I'm not trying to get into the debate about programs here, UConn v. Kansas and what. I think it's fair to say that would be a pretty even trade right now. That's a pretty even trade, and you could debate the merits on either side. But yes, I agree wholeheartedly, Nate. I agree wholeheartedly with that. I do. So thank you for that. Eddie, what's up, Eddie? Eddie Lozano, San Antonio Real Estate. If you need a real estate agent in San Antonio, you guys know who to hit up. My guy, Eddie Lozano. Thank you, Eddie. He says, hi, buddy. Basketball is a global sport. It is, and basketball is so. Well, first of all, look, Brett Yormark's been trying to go like international with the Big 12. So yes, building a better basketball brand overall can't help with that. I would also use this as a moment to mention, hey, UConn women's basketball is pretty good too. Not sure if you guys have heard. Women's basketball is continuing to increase more and more in popularity. So it's not nothing by adding just a powerhouse women's basketball program to the league as well, when you're trying to like look toward the future. And again, if you're the Big 12, leverage things that are not the traditional ways to do it in college athletics, because you can't win that game with the SEC and the Big 10. You've got to find different ways to compete. And so you have to find the ways that you can leverage your advantage and push it as much as you can. Basketball is one of those. UConn women's basketball doesn't hurt with all of that either. So Eddie, I appreciate it. Thank you for being here. Thank you for weighing in. Love hearing from you as always. Same with R Webb. Great to have you here, R Webb. R Webb says, John, there is some bad blood between UConn and former Big East current ACC members. BC, Pitt, UConn even sued BC. Okay. Wow. I didn't know that. All right. So I guess the point there, R Webb, you would be making is, and correct me if I'm wrong, you wouldn't be as worried about UConn going to the ACC, so maybe less of a sense of urgency to do it with UConn now. Kind of refuting a bit the point that there would be a time-sensitive element to this is the way I'm taking that, R Webb. Let me know if not, if I am off there. But always great context. R Webb is as up-to-date on all this stuff as anybody, so I listen when he talks. Thank you for that, R Webb. Did not realize that. David, David says, none of us know what TV is telling the Big 12 about ACC leftover football brands. Yes, and I mean, by the way, it's not just the Clemson and Florida State angle of this. It is also, it's not going to hurt you if it's a conference implosion and you're trying to take Louisville, Pitt, Virginia Tech, NC State, whatever combo it's going to be. I don't like, they're going to say, hey, we're not going to come because UConn, or you're going to say, well, we've got UConn football. Maybe in 4 years from now, we might be taking UConn football. That would create an odd number at, 21 or whatever it is. So because 4 years from now, we're going to take someone else in the league football wise, we're not going to go take you right now. Can we just say it out loud? Like, does that make sense? You're going to not take those schools and beef up your league. And by the way, with doing that, beef up basketball even more by taking Louisville hoops. At that point, you're not going to do it because you'd say, well, there'd be an odd number in 4 years when we don't really know what the landscape's going to look like. Like, I don't see that. Now, one thing that we have seen is reported pushback on this is that there are people in the Big 12, like presidents, athletic directors, who are saying there's a little bit of just like realignment, like expansion fatigue here, where they're saying, so Matt Norlander, for instance, reported this. There's also the matter of the Big 12 just getting to 16 schools. A lot of ADs and presidents in the league have been steadfast that they wanted to stay at 16 for a while, especially with the fallout from the House case settlement, which is still a huge unknown. Look, I get it. I mean, basically, I feel like that's ADs being like, look, we're exhausted, man. We're worried about integrating new teams for a second straight year. Now we're trying to figure out where we're going to come up with $25 million a year for revenue sharing. All the dust hasn't even totally settled on that to see what it's going to look like. Like, everything is changing in college athletics. I mean, shoot, they're talking about now getting rid of a spring portal window for football. Like, everything's changing. And they're like, look, adding more schools, like, we've got enough to worry about. I understand that. I very much understand that. But you can't let this opportunity pass you by. If it really is possible that this opportunity could pass you by, you just can't do that, man. I mean, the Big Ten was in the same sort of boat. We were hearing it this time last year, where they're like, look, we just expanded. We're taking in USC, UCLA. We need to get them integrated. We don't want to expand quite yet. And then when it came down to the final hour, and it's like, look, dude, Oregon and Washington are on the table. Are you taking them or not taking them? At that point, they were like, all right, fine. Like, we're going to do it. We need to do it. Let's go. So there is an element there. I would also say, like, hey, I've already invested in 4 new stocks this year. Do I really want to put stock into this new startup called Amazon? Do I really need to do that? I mean, if it's a great opportunity, you can't pass it by just because you have a little bit of fatigue from already having done it. Now, that's a pretty extreme example. I'm not saying that UConn basketball is like Amazon in 1997 and trying to invest in that, but I think you get the point that I'm making there. So I would not let that. I would not think it wise to let that stop me. Let me put it that way. I would not think it wise to let that stop me. Nate, what's up, Nate? Nate also says, John, every conference needs a Vanderbilt. Yes, there is. That would be an ancillary benefit to me from this. I don't think that can be a driving decision to like, hey, we need to add somebody that's going to lose football games to our conference. You definitely can't think like that. But if you're thinking about it from like a coach's perspective in all this, you'd be looking at it like, man, every week is difficult. Like, there is no night off in this league from a football standpoint. It would be kind of nice if we had somebody that would go out there and lose games. And that's where UConn could be, or Vanderbilt in that scenario. So yeah, I get what you're saying there. Nate. Alan, what's up, Alan? Thank you for being here. Great to see you. Alan says, John, fortune favors the brave. Your mark should get UConn now. There you go. That's all it is, everybody. Fortune favors the brave. Fortune favors the bold, whichever version of that you prefer. That's your mark's game. And this would be a fairly bold move. And that's a part of why, like, I can kind of get on board with it, man. I do think, especially, again, when you are the Big 12, you're not the Big 10, you're not the SEC. They can afford to not always be bold. If you're the Big 12, you've got to be pretty bold if you want to legitimately compete in this day and age. So I will stop the reading of Alan's comment just right there and give you that message. But Alan also says with UConn, KU going to the SEC would be an even greater step down. Time to invite Bama to join the Big 12, the premier basketball conference. I love you, Alan. I love you. Let's get your mark out there with the invite to Bama. See what happens. Hey, Bama's paying a little bit more attention to basketball now, and Saban's gone. Give it a couple of years. We'll see where Bama's at. But yes, you guys all know, if you've been on the channel for a while, like Alan is a KU fan. He does not want them to go to the SEC, and certainly would not want them to go to the SEC if UConn basketball is joining the conference. And you're talking about UConn, Kansas, Baylor, Houston, Arizona, all in the same basketball league. Plus, I mean, you look at like that next tier. I mean, it's again, very much like the SEC in football. Like you have created the SEC equivalent, because your next tier is like Iowa State, Texas Tech, BYU, who I just mentioned, in play for the number one kid in 25, a lot of money. K-State certainly throwing around a ton of money right now in the NIL space. So you've got a really good conference is the point. You've got a really, really good conference there. Alan, thank you for chiming in. Great to hear from you tonight, my friend. And Mountaineer Paul, I am happy to have Mountaineer Paul here to deliver this message to you guys, because I do want to help him with a bit of an announcement here for all of you guys who've been following his content. And you should be, if you're not right now. Make sure you go subscribe to Mountaineer Paul Talks Football. But Paul says UConn in the mid-2000s had several top 25 teams under Randy Edsall. West Virginia beats Penn State. Okay, let's take this in pieces here. You're all right. So I haven't even gotten into the specific, like talking about UConn football, because to me, so much of this is not even about really UConn football. It's a part of the roll of the dice here, but it's so far away. I don't know what the landscape is going to look like at that point. Take their basketball, get everything you can out of it in the short term. And I don't think the risk is really like that large, because things will probably look drastically different by the time we're getting to the UConn football thing. And I would also want to see, like, what are the terms? Like, how steady are the guarantees? Will UConn have to hit certain benchmarks to get their football program officially into the league in 2031? Like, let's see what this looks like, what the final details on it would be. But yes, if you do want to talk about football, they did. Obviously, they went to a Fiesta Bowl. I think that's what most people would probably remember and point to when we're talking about the football program here at UConn. But they had a nice run there after they joined the Big East. They went from independent to the Big East. They went to a bowl game and won 9 games in year 3 after doing that. And then they ripped off 4 straight bowls, which culminated in that Fiesta Bowl. So, yeah, I mean, they did. Now, it's not great. Even that Fiesta Bowl year was 8-5. I'm not saying they were world beaters, but they did find a way to at least be competitive in football there for a while in what at the time was a power conference. And I know the Brett McMurphy article referenced Arizona and Kansas. That was a part of the case that sources were telling him, like, well, I mean, look at Arizona and Kansas. They really turned their football programs around. You could even throw Baylor into that if you want to go, like, a little more historical in the Big 12. Baylor was a wretched football program for a while, and now they're a program that's been perfectly capable of winning double-digit games at any point in time over the last 10 to 15 years. So we've seen teams do it in the Big 12. UConn would get that opportunity, and they would have 7 years to try and build that up. There's a lot of things they would need to do. They probably would have to move their stadium back on campus because they're playing like 25 miles away. That certainly is not great, and attendance hasn't been good. But can you set, like, hey, you need certain attendance benchmarks. You need win-loss benchmarks. I don't know if that's something that's even remotely possible, but I want to wait and see all that play out. But you make a good point, Paul, that the football piece of this is not, it's not impossible. It's certainly not impossible. Okay, West Virginia beat Penn State. Yes, look, that game week is here. We are technically here for game week. I can't wait for that. Big noon Saturday, West Virginia, Penn State. And I get more and more excited the more that I see the banter go back and forth between the two fan bases, which, Paul, I know you've done a great job of stoking some of the flames on that. And I love it, man. So that's what makes college football great. It does remind me kind of the season opening backyard brawl experiences that have been had as well. And I know the backyard brawl will happen early on in the season here too, but West Virginia playing their rivals is a great, great thing for college football. And the final thing, as Mountaineer Paul mentions here, his channel is going to become Locked On West Virginia next week. So I gave credit to the Locked On crew, Drake at Locked On Big 12, and then Locked On UConn, who were ahead of the curve on this last week. Paul is going to be your guy for Locked On West Virginia. So make sure you go follow his channel. It will turn over into Locked On West Virginia, which I think is going to be great, and an opportunity that he really deserves. So I'm excited to see how that plays out. Go support him, guys. Not just West Virginia content. He's covering the Big 12 as well. So get a little piece of what's going on there with Mountaineer Paul. I appreciate you, my friend. Thank you for being here as always, and thank you for your support of the channel. Matthew, what's up, Matthew? Matthew says, Georgia Tech making engineers proud. Awesome game over the Seminoles. Love the Georgia Tech fight song. They do have a pretty good fight song. Georgia Tech does have a pretty good fight song. I had to kind of stop myself from, I do have a take on this, and maybe this is a good time to transition. We can talk more UConn if you guys want to. You know how to be a part of the show. Click the $ below the chat box to do so. But that was really fun to watch Georgia Tech play like that. And I was starting to think, like, man, has there been a more irrelevant football program in the last 5 to 10 years than Georgia Tech? And I went and looked at the year by year. I was like, they were a little bit better than I gave them credit for, but some of that was coming when they were running the triple option, right? So it was like the fact that they were doing the triple option still and nobody else was, and it was kind of a boring style, and I don't know. They just faded into irrelevancy pretty fast for me, where I was not thinking about them at all. So I'm very happy for Georgia Tech here, and it was entertaining to watch them really beat Florida State up in the trenches. And I guess that brings me to the bigger point here, which is just kind of especially in this realignment world where the smack talk gets so personal. And not just, I don't mean personal necessarily from a person to person, although it definitely does. I'm not saying that doesn't happen. But for the schools, it's really personal, because it's no longer just, hey, your team sucks this year. It's now well, you guys are a crappy brand and nobody cares about you and nobody watches you. And, it's just a whole nother level of telling somebody about their inadequacy that happens now in realignment Twitter world, with all this happening, coinciding at the time where we're all, way, way, way too online, and we get too into making fun of people and looking down at people. And Big 12 fans have experienced all of that, right? But Florida State has been doing a lot of talking, and I have no particular vendetta against Florida State at all. Would love to see them in the Big 12. But Florida State's been doing a lot of talking for the last year plus. And it's not just about their unbeaten season last year. It's not just about Kirk Herbstreit and being left out of the playoff and all of that stuff. It's all been about, we're better than the conference that we're in. We are better than you, ACC, and we know it. And you guys are holding us back. And why are we in this little peon conference? You guys all suck and nobody cares about you and nobody watches your games. If you do that, you better be careful about what happens when you go out in week 0 and you lose to the team that was picked to finish 9th in your conference. It's not going to be a great look. You're going to have to wear a lot of L's when that happens. And that's exactly what Florida State is dealing with. And you know what? From that standpoint, you got to hold the L's. They do deserve it, because they have talked a lot about that, not just with their actions, but literally talked. They have literally talked a lot. And the same thing goes for SMU. And Matthew, I appreciate you for this. Thank you for your support of the channel, and thank you for shouting out Georgia Tech and Brent Key, who's doing a hell of a job. But SMU was a part about this too. They played an opponent, thankfully for them, that was bad enough that they could still rally back and just have the game completely gifted to them. I mean, my God, I watched a lot of that game. Nevada completely coughed that one up. But SMU has been doing a lot of talking. They get their big boy donors to pay their way into the new league. And suddenly the ACC is awesome. The Big 12 is horrible. SMU is going to the playoff in their first year. And they find themselves down 2 scores in the fourth quarter against a team that had not beaten a Power 5 opponent in 3 years? I believe it was 3 years. And a team that had been 4-20 over the last 2 seasons. Yeah, not a great look. SMU, not a great look, and had to have it handed back to you on a silver platter. SMU, another school that deserved every bit of smack talk that they were getting. It's curbed a little bit because, yes, they did find a way to pull out the win and pull out the game, but they deserved every bit of that. However, the big caveat to this, and the point that is coming back around on this, is that, well, it is totally fair, and I'm totally for everybody coming after them on Twitter and letting them know just what everybody thought of seeing them struggle. At the end of the day, it matters zip to their current statuses, like their big picture standings here. Again, a part of what sucks about realignment. You can say all you want. Florida State, man, serves you right. You guys have been talking smack on this league. Jim Phillips gets, well, people may say, the last laugh. It's the laugh at least for a day, but that's just it. It's only a day, because nothing has changed about Florida State's situation. Florida State is still, by current 2024 college football terms, I'm not saying I want it to be this way, but the way everything operates in the sport right now, they are better than the ACC. They should be making more than what they're making in the ACC. They're certainly on a level of like an Oregon or a Washington, who's now in the Big Ten. They're a brand of that stature. Florida State and Clemson, we can obviously include Clemson in this too. They're a brand of that stature. That has not changed just because of one loss in Ireland to Georgia Tech. It's very funny. There's a news cycle that accompanies that, and you can go take your shots now. It doesn't change. Florida State could go 7-5 this year. It will not change that fact. So I understand the catharsis of ACC fans getting it out on them. And yeah, I was retweeting some of the jokes out there. It was funny. It's great content. Doesn't change where they're at. And the same goes for SMU. Don't think I'm done with you, SMU. SMU is still in a tough spot. Yes, it's theoretically, yes, a better spot than where they were before, because they are in, for right now, a Power 4 conference. But the ACC is still on an iceberg to implosion, or at least taking on a ton of water. And that's not going to be great for SMU. It's not. The best case scenario for SMU is that they stay in a watered down version of the ACC, which, might be still a legitimate step above the AAC. But it's not going to be this like 3 or 4 steps above that SMU really thinks it's getting here. And, nothing changed based on the fact that they went on the road and almost lost to Nevada. They could have won that game by 75. Nothing would have changed about SMU's predicament and where they're at. So that is the thing. Well, this was fun. It was a fun thing for everybody to enjoy and indulge. And it was, hey, college football's back and this feels great. And man, how is Georgia Tech doing this? They really pushed Florida State around in the trenches. I know everybody wants to talk about DJU, who, in some ways may be in the midst of hoodwinking a third consecutive fan base on his abilities and potential based on his pedigree. But you got to start with what was happening up front to Florida State there. That would be where a lot of my questions are, just as a casual observer there, somebody who does not know the Florida State roster inside and out. It sure was jarring to see Georgia Tech doing that to them. Ultimately, it doesn't really change Florida State's place here in all of this. So, but I hope everybody had a lot of fun. Watching the game and remembering what it's like to watch live college football games happening there. So, all right, we got about 10 minutes left in the show here. About 10 minutes left. If you guys want to talk more about the UConn story, welcome to do that. If you guys want to go somewhere else, I'm going to give you a couple of different takes here before I get out the door, but you can change that if you would like. Click the $ below the chat box to do that. You can submit a super chat. It will guarantee that you do get on the show. Let's see here. We'll see if everybody tunes out on this. Coach Prime stuff nationally generates a lot of conversation, because that's the fascinating part about Coach Prime's Colorado. Nationally, people care about it. The college football casuals care about it. You guys don't, because you love college football. You eat, sleep, and breathe it, much like I do. And for a lot of us, it's just kind of exhausting, and it's frustrating the level of attention it gets when this is a 4-8 team from last year. So I get it. I know that this may not necessarily do numbers, but I do implore to you that this is pretty interesting. We don't see this a whole lot. I went through the story when the Sean Keeler back and forth happened, and Coach Prime was not just like very much pushing back on him, but also giving, crap to reporters that were just collateral damage. He's worried about something national CBS did, which still is very frivolous. And because of that, won't take a question from a guy who just works at CBS Denver. Like, that's pretty weak. That's pretty weak. And now here we have Sean Keeler, who is a columnist who's thrown a lot of barbs at Coach Prime and has been very critical of him after they had a pretty testy back and forth at Colorado's media day. Apparently the next day, according to the Denver Post, which is who Keeler works for, the next day, Colorado Sports Info Department contacted the Denver Post and said, Colorado football, basically, Coach Prime, players, anybody, they're not taking questions from Sean Keeler the rest of the year. Indefinitely. Didn't even say the rest of the year. Indefinitely, they're not taking questions from Sean Keeler. He can still be credentialed, but they will not answer any questions from him. Here is the story. Let me read to you from the Denver Post. The CU Athletics Department has informed the Denver Post that head coach Deion Sanders and anyone else with the Buffs football program will no longer take questions from columnist Sean Keeler. In a statement provided to the Post editors on Friday, department officials said the decision was due to what it perceived as a series of sustained personal attacks in Keeler's coverage of the football program. When asked for specific examples of how Keeler personally attacked Sanders, a Sports Info staffer cited his use of phrases such as false prophet, deposition Deion, Planet Prime, Bruce Lee of BS, the Deion Kool-Aid, and circus. And I got to admit, look, regardless of where you stand on this, can we agree that the Bruce Lee of BS is a pretty good line? I mean, that's very funny. That's objectively funny. I don't care where you stand. If you're a Colorado fan, you got to admit that's an objectively funny line from Sean Keeler. So anyway, that is first things first. The second thing I want to establish in this story is that there is a difference between a reporter and a columnist. And when I've watched a lot of the reaction to this online, predictably, goes very polarizing in both directions. One of my frustrations has been all these people like, reporting just isn't like what it used to be. Reporters are supposed to be respectful. Of course, this makes sense. He's not being respectful as a reporter. Sean Keeler is not a reporter. Sean Keeler is a columnist. A columnist is paid to give their opinion. It is akin to a radio show host. A radio show host is not a reporter. Their job is to be entertaining. It's not to be a journalist. Sean Keeler's job is to give his opinion. That is what a column is. You write an opinion. So he's doing his job actually quite well for the Denver Post by generating this much discussion and hubbub. That's what you do to be a good columnist. Now, is there an art to it and not, taking too cheap of shots and ensuring that you have longevity? Like, yes, sure, absolutely. And we can talk about that in this story. But his job was never to be a reporter. It was to give his opinion on what was going on with Colorado. So that, if your criticism is, well, he's not a journalist and not doing journalism well because of this, well, you're wrong. Journalism is not what he's supposed to be doing here. He's supposed to be giving his opinion. Keeler, having said that, I would just say, I don't know him personally. Just from what I have heard and people who, he was around Big 12 country for a while, like at the Des Moines Register. It seems like he has a bit of a reputation as being somebody that has, whether you want to call it unfair or not, has drawn some strong reactions from coaches and fans in the past that were like, people, I will just say I heard of a lot of people who were not terribly surprised by this. You can do with that what you will, I suppose. On the same token, Deion has a reputation for doing this too, because the Denver Post pointed this out, and I had forgotten about this story until they brought it up. But in July 2021, Coach Prime would not let a reporter from the Jackson Clarion Register. Okay, let me start this over. In July 2021, a reporter from the Jackson Clarion Ledger, who was obviously covering Jackson State at the time, they were barred from reporting on the Jackson State football team at SWAC Media Day. And that was a day after that reporter wrote a story detailing a domestic violence charge against one of the team's top recruits. So Coach Prime, in his past, when he was at Jackson State, said, no, reporter, by the way, this is a reporter. This is not a columnist. This is a reporter. And he said, reporter, you can't come to SWAC Media Day because you reported a story about one of our recruits getting a domestic violence charge. Okay, now that's very weak. That is very weak of Coach Prime to do. That we can't. You can argue with me about the merits of the Sean Keeler thing. But if it's reporter is out there reporting a fact that a charge is out there, domestic violence related against one of your recruits, you can't. That's where we're starting to talk about, a free press in the country. And you can't shut that guy down. So they both have a history, I guess is the point for me on this. And I think that at least needs to be acknowledged here. Regardless of where you stand, you got to admit, both of these guys have a history of where they wound up in each of these situations. So as always is the case, everyone wants to go far to one side, far to the other. The answer is probably somewhere in between. Sean Keeler may have pushed it a tad bit too far, but his job is, in fairness, to give his opinion. Coach Prime may have a bit of a point that, calling him the Bruce Lee of BS may be a little bit over the top, but at the same time, this has always been his MO, that he's not wanted anything that's negative to the point where he's barred reporters before. And by the way, this was also reported by the Denver Post. Prime has specific language in his contract that requires him to speak only with, quote, mutually agreed upon media as part of his employment with Colorado. The mutually agreed upon clause does not appear in the contracts of Buffs men's basketball coach Tad Boyle or women's basketball coach J.R. Payne, nor was it in the contract of the previous football coach of Colorado, Carl Durrell. Again, I would point out that's pretty weak. Does Coach Prime get some unfair hate because there are people out there who don't like him and how brash he is? Yes, he does. He also benefits from some unfair coverage that teams that are 4-8 typically do not get. So take the good with the bad. That's pretty weak that's in the contract from me. So I've said it before, I'll say it again. Coach Prime being successful is great for the league. I am rooting for it. I like him. I am generally somebody who would be on the side of hey, I like the flashy guy like this. I'm not going to be the side that just hates on him for merely being that. But there are things here I don't like, and there are things here that just continue to add up that make me think he's worrying about a lot of things that are not actually winning football games and getting better from being 4-8 last year. So I'll just say I'm much more intrigued by where all this is going to go. I'm much more intrigued by where all this is going to go. We'll put it that way. All right, let's wrap up here with some super chats. Appreciate all of you guys for being patient. Starting with Michael. What's up, Michael? Thank you for being here. Michael says, if BYU KSU is a late game, are you tailgating with us? Look, I'll try to come by a tailgate either way. Put it that way. I'm no stranger to being up and around at stadiums early. I used to, back in my radio days, do pregame radio starting 4 hours before kickoff. So if it was an 11 a.m. game, I was ready to go on the air at 7 a.m. So I will do my absolute best, Michael, to meet you and any of the BYU fans that are going to be there that want to chat before the game. So I would love to. My friend. David, what's up, David? David checking in again says, I think UConn basketball is more valuable than the fourth ACC leftover football team. That's an interesting discussion. I brought up Pitt earlier, right, in my hypothetical. If UConn football is going to take the spot of Pitt football, how much value, the question would be, how much value does UConn basketball add to what that overall deal would be and what teams are going to make versus how much they would dilute the football deal, because UConn football would, in all likelihood, it's going to lose you something per school off the deal because they're not going to add as much as they wouldn't be neutral on, if everybody's worth $30 million a year, UConn wouldn't be worth that. And so you're not going to get $30 million for them. So then there's less money and you have to split it an extra way. So you're going to lose some money there. So if they're worth an extra $3 million a year to the basketball deal, is it going to drag you down more than $3 million a year per school on the football deal would basically be the question there. I will just admit, I'm out over my skis on that. I don't know. You'd have to talk to a TV exec. I'm not sure what a TV exec exactly would say about that at the moment. But if we're talking about like long-term potential, then yes, UConn basketball provides more upside. More upside. We'll say that. UConn basketball provides a hell of a lot more upside than Pitt football. That is true. That is definitely true. I would wholeheartedly agree with that if you wanted to frame it like that. And I think that is probably the way that you would want to frame that. Ken, what's up, Ken? Okay, Ken, yes, I have seen your emails about the 75th anniversary patch for K-State football. I think it would be cool. Ken, I will admit, though, I have not had a chance to like go through and read every single one. There were a lot of emails there and a lot of back and forth from the email chain. I think it would be a cool thing to do. I don't have the bandwidth to help you in the fight a lot, but I commend you for doing it, and I think it's cool what you have dug up on that front. So appreciate you reaching out, and thank you for being here on the show, my friend. We got one more here. Pacific Northwest Ute. I have a hunch, Pacific Northwest Ute, that this is mocking Coach Prime a little bit here. It says, don't hate on Prime. He's got receipts. Yeah, he has said that. He's definitely let us all know. I mean, everybody has receipts in this day and age. Everything happens digitally, right? It's pretty easy to keep receipts. You know, you can click one button for a bookmark on Twitter. People know how to do it. Everybody's got receipts. Everybody's got receipts. I fear, though, you're not a Coach Prime fan, Pacific Northwest Ute. That's my hunch based on the way you laid all that out. Thank you, Pacific Northwest Ute, and thank you to everybody for being a part of the show tonight. Very lively, very, very lively. Got a ton of people in here. Appreciate everybody watching on Twitter. Appreciate everybody watching on YouTube. Man, I've gone this entire time. This is my fault. I should have done it. I've gone this entire time without promoting the Open for Business newsletter. Make sure if you are a Big 12 fan and you want Big 12 news straight to your inbox with no SEC or Big 10 filter on it, and you want to be the smartest Big 12 fan in your group chat, sign up at ofbnews.com for the Open for Business newsletter. Again, ofbnews.com for the Open for Business newsletter. We've got over 2,000 Big 12 fans now subscribed in under 2 months. Over 2,000 Big 12 fans trust Open for Business. So you should too. ofbnews.com. Or if you're watching on YouTube, you can just click the link in the description to go ahead and get signed up. Very, very easy to do. ofbnews.com is the best way you can support the channel. If you are into what I do, you're into what I'm doing right now, and you want to support me and my endeavors, OFB News to subscribe for Open for Business is the way to go. Okay. I appreciate all of you guys. Thank you for being here. Like the video on your way out the door. If you can share any of this, whether it is the newsletter or the YouTube channel, this video, share it on social media, Twitter, X, Instagram, Facebook, wherever you are at and wherever your people are at. Let them know about what we are doing here. Appreciate all of you guys. We're going to be previewing a week of football games coming up in the Big 12 and elsewhere across the country next time I talk to you. And by the way, we've got a really big Thursday coming up in the Big 12. We've got, 3 Big 12 teams in action on Thursday? There's a lot of games on Thursday. So we are close. We are close, my friends. Very, very close. Take care. I appreciate you all, and I will talk to you soon.